Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trendcrusher podcast. I'm Peter K. On this episode, I'm joined by Steffen Kummerer of Obscura. The band's latest album, a Sonication, is out right now via Nuclear Blast Records. I had a great chat with Steffen about the album, the creative process, and a lot more. But before we get into my chat with Steffen, I'd like to play a track from a Finnish death metal act, Sepulchral Curse. Their album, Moon Evocations, will be out on the 28th of February via Dark Descent Records. Their vocalist, Kari, says, and I quote, "The backbone is death metal, but we never shielded away from exploring new inspirations and influences, which shaped the unique edge synonymous with Sepulchral Curse. Music needs to be dark, heavy, and furious." Here's the single from the album, House of the Black Moon. And that was Sepulchral Curse with House of the Black Moon, leaving the links to the album in the show notes. Now, onto my chat with Steffen Kummerer of Obscura. Here it is. Hi, Stefan. Thanks and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure talking to you for the new album, Obscura, and whatever questions you may have as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're talking a little bit over a month before the release of your album, Sonication, which is out February 7th and this is via Nuclear Blast Records. But we've already at this point heard a single from the album. So tell me, first of all, how does it feel now that, people have heard Silver Linings, the first single from the album, and you're doing press around it also?
Well, first of all, it's always like having a new baby when you're going to release a new album. And with Obscura, it's album number 7. So I've been there a few times, but still it feels like the first time, especially when you get and receive the physical copies, like the vinyl pressing, the CDs with all the photos, the layouts, the artworks, and how everything looks like. And the music, well, I've been working on the music for more than a year to assemble it, to write and record it. And it's hard to say because you're so surrounded by it for such a long time to see it from a meta point of view. So it's very interesting how people react and also which connections they see and hear of the music and how they interpret a couple of things. So far, only one single has been released, Silver Linings, as you mentioned. And that's also the opening track of the album. And that song contains a lot of references to previous work of the band, but also the influences. I'm talking about Death, The Sound of Perseverance albums, that album, Symbolic, but also what we did in the past. I hear a lot of vibes that came across similar to Acroasis, similar to Cosmogenesis, but also on the last record. So it's a nice sum up. The cool thing is you don't know how people react. And the feedback I got so far was very positive on the record and the song itself, because people see and hear always different details and new details every new spin they have on the record, and especially here on that song, because there's so much detail work, a little bit, I wouldn't call it buried, but it's not an production that serves everything on a silver tableau. It's more one of those albums you discover something new every time you listen to it again. So with every spin, there's something new that unfolds a little bit. So it's nice. It's really nice to see, and I'm looking forward to the release in February. It's more than a month to go, but so far, we are in the middle of promoting the record. We are getting so many features, interviews, videos. It's ridiculous. It's a very, very good time for the band.
Okay, I'm going to break down everything you said because you kind of like said so much, right? So let's start from the top. What you talked about it being your 7th album, and you've been doing this close to like 2 decades now. How different is it for you each time that your album releases, right? Like, I mean, in a simple way, I always ask musicians, especially once they've worked on an album and been so close to it for so long, when was the last time you actually heard any songs or the album of in its entirety?
I listened to the entire record yesterday again. So every time it's nice and new, and I also try to listen it to on different systems. I prefer listening to the album on very good headphones, like closed headphones, not the small ones you put in your ear, because just out of experience, the sound the sound shows so many details that you would get distracted if there are any noises coming from the side. So I'm listening to the album in the car. I'm listening to the album on different stereo systems at home and at friends. Of course, studio monitors, but not everybody on this planet owns 5,000 euro studio monitors and have them at home. So it's very interesting, and that also gives you a first impression how people might feel and see from their perspective how this album is produced and sounds.
Okay, now you've given me more incentive to get like better headphones just to listen to this album and kind of see more of the detail. But one thing that kind of struck me about, and I was going through the press release about the album, right? Where it says that, it's a new chapter in the band's evolution. And now, when I typically read most of these press releases, right, you kind of see all of this kind of put together, it's our most brutal, our heaviest kind of release. But
Mhm.
also, when I was listening, and I remember first listening to Silver Lining, right? There is, like you said, there's something familiar, but there's also something new about it. And you've also said that, there was a framework that was relaxed, there was new inspirations. You talked about the death influence. I think that's pretty much on the nose. You can kind of tell that sound. Was there a different approach that you had this time around while working on the album? Like, what changed or what was different this time around?
Um, for a Sonication, I had a certain idea how to start from scratch, and that was being song oriented and not guitar centered. Because I thought it's getting a little bit one dimensional if you only showcase one instrument instead of all of them. I'm always working with world-class musicians in the band, and somehow you have to. My approach is always to work with the strength of every person you have in your team or in your band in this case, and therefore I have a fantastic bassist. I have a world-class drummer. I have a fantastic guitarist, and they should get their spots. And I'm a guitarist myself. I write most of my music on the guitar, but thinking of it, just lean back and see the big picture. It makes much more sense when it comes to storytelling that you highlight each different character at a certain point. Therefore, um, I thought about how we could get the production into shape. And this time, I wanted to add a little bit more of this wall of sound concept. So in the past, we usually worked that way that we had one guitar hard hand to the left, one guitar hard on the right. That's very helpful when you have very busy arrangements, counterpoint sections, similar parts like that that needs clearness. But in this album, especially in this production, I doubled and quadrupled all of those rhythm guitars. The idea was to not only go left and right, but also in the depth. Within the engineering, it's called depth of field. So if you listen to it with good headphones, here we are again, you hear where all those instruments are placed in the panorama. So that means you're not only having one guitar left, one guitar right, and the vocals and everything else in the center, straight in your face. It's more about having the drums a little bit in the back, having the bass sitting lovely in between, and all that is there in, I would call it the background. This is where all the details are happen. All those the choirs, the vocoder sections, the synths, everything we added, all those extra layers, they are making the big difference, and those details sometimes make a big change. And therefore, I'm absolutely happy if you say there's so much familiar, but at the same time something new. So we have a certain signature sound. We established that for I don't know how many years now. You listen to a song and you figure, that's this band. And I'm very proud of that achievement. At the same time, as a musician, you don't want to repeat yourself. So I always try to find new approaches and add something new and something else to the palette to stay relevant. And also, as a musician myself, I want to explore more. And when one part is the production, the second is the songwriting, but both is connected very well. And in this case, I'm very happy how it turned out. A Sonication sounds like an Obscura record, but at the same time, a tad different.
Yeah, and I think that's very clear. And if you allow me to say this, right? I mean, at one point I felt also, and this was my general assessment, I think you'd also probably see it in current technical death metal bands, right? There was that kind of sterile sound that everyone was kind of going for, which didn't end up making everyone sound different, but ended up making them all sound the exact same. in terms of production wise. And I think one of the things about Obscura is you guys have always been the one that sets the sound for the rest of everyone else to come, right? So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you'll have done on a Sonication kind of maybe trying to be replicated. But then, which also brings me to my question, since you said you had this, wall of sound that you wanted to do, what were your references? Because I'm sure, first of all, you have to kind of write those parts which would sound great. But then, second is also in terms of production. So, did you have any albums that you were looking at references other than that you already mentioned for both writing and production?
For when it comes to writing, it's more about a gut feeling. When it comes to production, I was I made a conscious choice to work with Fredrik Nordström at Studio Fredman in Sweden. He also produced the Valediction record, and if you see the history of the band, we are extremely consistent. If you just see the first four albums, not the debut album separate, but those four albums that are connected, we worked with the same producer, the same record label, the same artwork artist, and the core of the sound never changed. With A Valediction, we started a new chapter, and therefore I changed the production. With Freddie Nordstrom, I changed the artist to add ideas on the visual end. We work with Elira and Canto, and also we got a new partner with Nuclear Blast Records. So basically, everything changed from the outside, but not, and we keep it consistently. Let me explain. I had the intention to work a little bit more authentic, a little bit more pure, if you want to call it like that. You mentioned a lot of recent productions that came out of the tech death world that sound maybe polished or sterile or something. That is totally fine. From my perspective, there's no right or wrong. If you aim for a production like this, go for it. I'm not the person who tells anyone what to do, but to me, I always had the idea of unmantling or dismantling the diamonds that all those musicians have I'm working with. And if you, for example, work with a fantastic drummer with an excellent groove and vibe, and you put all of his hits into a grid and you edit it to the max, you basically cut off his soul in his own playing. Then you can just replace the drummer, and you could even change, I don't know, the sound library you're working with, the drum library. And I went against the stream, and I tried to leave everything as authentic as possible, as raw as possible, and at times even edgy. And some people are not used to that because that was the way you recorded in the late 90s. There are a lot of like high class produced albums in the late 90s, early 2000s before everything was able to be edited because the performance was key. Every musician simply had to deliver. When I talked to the guys in Death or in Cynic, there was no cut. They played 1,000 different takes until the songs have been there, and then you feel the energy. And this is something you cannot edit in that way. And therefore, I try to pick the piece from both sides. So I love having a certain proper performance and something you can work with, like an authentic delivery of the musical character of each musician. On the other end, we are working with so many layers, and the technical approach I mentioned with the wall of sound, it helps so much to work with the technical abilities you have these days to combine both worlds. So it's a never-ending story, and there's so much more to explore. But for a Sonication in particular, I wanted to dismantle a little human touch. This is the whole idea of those 3 albums we're connecting, and this is also one of the reasons I'm working with Freddie Nordstrom, because he proved multiple times, not only in the 90s, that he knows how to produce albums with a different vibe, a different character, and a different sound. In the 90s, he produced bands like At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, In Flames, Dimmu Borgir. But what he also did, more recently are bands like Bring Me the Horizon and Architects. Those bands are fantastic. They sound absolutely awesome and unique, but relevant, timeless, similar to the bands in the 90s. So that was the reason. That was the reason I wanted to work with Freddie Nordstrom. And those are also some albums I refer to when it comes to production. It's a very long answer, but I try to be as detailed as possible.
No, definitely. I mean, totally appreciate it. Um, at this point, I think before we go on, since we've talked so much about both the songwriting and the production, I think it's time to play Silver Linings. Can you tell me why you chose that A first to be the first single, but also the first track on the album?
Um, the song was the first one we wrote for the entire record because a lot of those riffs and ideas have been collected during the recent tours, and many of those parts have been played like doing sound checks, and I did multiple demo versions of the songs, and it felt like it's catchy, it's straight, very straight, um, for our universe, and it still maintains the melancholic introverted vibe that represents the entire album. So on one hand, you have a song that represents Obscura as a band, but at the same time, it also represents the vibe and the pace of the entire album. So it's always very hard, to be honest. It's very, very hard to pick the first glimpse you want to show to the fans, the audience, and press and everyone, because this is the first impression. This is basically your card to show what you're going at this stage in your life. But I think it was a good choice, and so far reactions have been quite positive.
So if you haven't already heard it, here is Silver Linings. And that was Silver Linings by Obscura, and I'm talking to the man himself, Stefan. Now, a couple of things that kind of spawned off what you said, right? One is, you talked about intuition or a gut feeling that you have. Uh, and since you've been doing this for a while, right? And Obscura is not your only band, also, right? Uh, how would you kind of say is the Obscura sound? Like when you're writing the riffs, like how do you kind of, if you can put that into words, like how do you know this is Obscura?
That is a very good question. I do have my palette of ideas in I want to work within Obscura. It's similar to your way of life in the very end. It's very helpful to know what you want to achieve in your life, but it's also very helpful to know what you don't want. And in that case, it helps you from both sides to pick. So when I'm writing for Obscura these days, I'm not there to show off. I'm not there um, to show anyone what is possible on any instruments because that's not my approach. I'm song oriented. I'm more interested in storytelling. I would like to write an album front to end that keeps yourself as a musician, but also as a listener, as a fan, entertaining from front to end. I love listening to an entire album and just dive in it, and just forget like the day-to-day things you have to do with family, job, business, whatever. If you just open the news, you're distracted. So the music is basically a way to channel something different, and therefore I want to write a tiny little story between 40 and 60 minutes that people can escape their day-to-day life, and therefore it needs to be a little bit diverse, but within our, how you call it, our boundaries, our outlines, there are also some restrictions. For example, for to the core, we always have been a death metal band from the very beginnings in 2002 to right now. Of course, there's always the need and the idea to add something new, like new approaches, not only production but also songwriting or sometimes instruments. And to a certain degree, there's some room, but you always have to question yourself: is this part of the band? Is this making sense? And this is the nice part of writing music at home. I'm working in a full studio, and there are so many possibilities, but somehow you always have to question: does it make sense? Is it coherent? Is it making sense to the big picture at all? Again, here we are with the gut feeling, because in the studio you can basically merge anything. You could add electronics, a techno song, classic, humpa, whatever you want to any other band or any other musical style. But in this case, there's a clear vision where the band goes and what the band wants to achieve. And as a guideline, I always have those concepts, those long-term concepts. Speaking of which, those three albums we're talking right now, starting with a valediction, now a sonication, and then the next one, they are connected. They're connected when it comes to pace, feel, visuals, colors, and also production. So therefore, it's a it's a very healthy mix out of keeping artistic freedom, but at the same time, you have some kind of a guideline you can follow.
Okay, hold the thought on the trilogy. That's coming up towards the end. But I thought, and whenever I speak to musicians like yourself, I always kind of throw in these questions, which is let's shift gears away from Obscura for a second. You talked about listening to music. Uh, were there any bands or releases that you really enjoyed in 2024 that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. Always listening to new bands, or sometimes old bands that drop a new album that is really cool and relevant. Recently, I'm listening to bands like Unto Others from the United States, or Tribulation, a band from Sweden. Yorth Era, it's a band from Greece. I just discovered the old school way. A friend of mine just recommended it, and I gave it a listen and a spin, and then a second and a third one, and now I'm a fan. Usually, all of those bands, I I went down a rabbit hole with are bands that have a very, very unique sound. I love authenticity, and I always see originality above perfectionism. This is somehow something that grew during the last couple of years listening to music. I love bands with an own identity, and all those groups I just mentioned, those artists, they're fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing it. So to flip it around then is in 2025, and this is again a wish list or whatever, if you are aware of any releases that will be happening, any kind of bands or music that you're looking forward to?
I just go with the flow, to be honest. I'm really looking forward for the new album of the Swedish band Lick. It's
Okay.
rather old school. It's a very, very talented old school death metal band, more like the Stockholm school of
Yeah.
melodic. I saw them live a couple of years ago, and they just blew me away. And Duel, I think the new album is already out. That's not 2025. So there's a live record of a befriended band called Dark Fortress. I'm looking forward to it. It should be out in early 2025. And then let's see. I heard Mastodon is going to release something new,
Oh, yeah.
and probably a dozen other fantastic bands I don't have in my mind right now. So there's so much more coming, and I just can't wait to listen to it. The best place to listen to music is in the very evening before you go to bed. Again, with good headphones, and just don't get distracted. Just dive into the vibe and the flow and enjoy a really good album from to end. This is really a very honest suggestion to discover music.
Awesome. So good advice for everyone tuned in. But another way I truly enjoy discovering new bands, but also watching them live is, I mean, watching them is actually live. And you'll have announced a tour starting in Europe, which Gorod and Skeletal Remains. I actually caught Skeletal Remains live here in India, and they were a band that reminded me that I need to wear, earplugs while watching live music now because they were just really loud. Like they blew up the place. But what are you looking forward to from the tour?
We have so many tours lined up for next year. So the European run in February you mentioned is the first leg of our world tour. We're going to play with Obscura, and Skeleton Witch and Gorod are fantastic bands. One is more on the technical end, Gorod. They have a very, very original twist in their groove. It's hard to describe. Definitely a cool live band. We also already toured with probably a decade ago. And Skeleton Remains, they just came new on the table. They replaced Rings of Saturn last minute, and they're more the old school band. And I'm very happy to hear that they've been super loud because that just underlines exactly the way I feel this band. It's a lot of early mid '90s death metal, US death metal. I hear there, like Morbid Angel death vibes. It's really cool. It's always nice to hear um, to go on shows, visit shows, and see bands that differ from each other. You don't want to see the same style an entire evening long, and those three bands definitely have their original own style, each one. So after this February tour, we are going to head to North America in April and May. Then we have a couple of festivals, and then we are going to another European tour, which is not announced yet. In between, I'm going to Asia with Tulcandra. I'm leaving for a European tour with Tulcandra in January, and there's a Mexican run just announced, I think today. So very busy 2025 and much more to come. So I'm really looking forward to start this touring cycle to bring all the new songs to life on a stage production, and we are really working hard on well making some twists in our stage production. I'm really fascinated in the visuals, in light production, in also stage production. What you could do with some stage props, how it affects the recognition of the fan. It's simply incredible how how you can move things and vibes and feelings when you just add not only a good performance on stage, but also put a great stage production and a light production that is like completely timed to everything on top. It makes a big difference. It's really, really great. And there are so many bands out there who just make that happen. It's really nice. It's absolutely a new field I started to work with recently. So we also hired a designer, a stage designer, to help us here, and the entire um, the tour or all the different tour legs we're working on for a Sonication for the next 3 years. They will see different visuals, different again, different production, and also different songs. So definitely worth to see.
Yeah, it's interesting that you kind of say that, right? Because, even though it's been a few years, one of my favorite live memories, not sure if you're familiar with the band Alceste, the French band. They kind of started off black metal, but ended up like in a very shoegazy sound. And they played a festival here in India, and they played. So here in India, you get like dusk is about 6 o'clock or so,
Hmm.
and they played a set at that time, and you could just see everyone kind of lost in the music, like the sun just kind of setting down and all of that just like elevated the entire thing, like you said, right? So it's just these small variables that completely kind of change the experience for the audience, and it's as simple as just the timing, right?
Yes, yes. There are so many small factors that make a show a awesome and memorable one. It's ridiculous. And if I just think about Alcest, I can imagine that very well because this mellow vibe fits and drives just perfectly with this setting. Really cool. We actually played many shows with Tulkandra back in the days with the guys. So
Oh wow.
I'm very aware of their black metal roots.
Yeah. So totally. And I'm so glad one of the things that actually it like for me it stood out in like 2025 font when I saw like Asia, tour of Asia being planned. So definitely everyone on this side of the world, stay tuned for more details. Is it Obscura or Odithal Kandra?
Uh, Two different tours.
Oh
So
wow.
July this year, we are heading to Asia with Tulkandra to play a full headlining run,
Oh
probably 2 weeks long.
yes.
And with Obscura, we are working on a different tour with a, of course, we with that band we need a bigger setting, we need different circumstances, and I'm working hard with our agent to get like a full tour. I'm talking about 3 weeks, and also finally make it over to India, make it to China, and discovering a couple of places we've never been before, like South Korea, for example. We played many times in Japan. We played in Southeast Asia. Um, Speaking of which, Indonesia, we played Bangkok, we played Singapore, many places, but there are so many spots we never visited. And sometimes we have been very close, but it didn't work out so far. But my approach is always if we are going that way, I want to do more than just one or two shows. I want to see a full proper tour and then, you know, enjoy the ride, not only the time on stage, but also everything aside. I love traveling. I love to see different cultures and meet new people and just get impressed or get a clue how society works in different corners of the world. This is also a part that drives me going since more than 20 years. I simply love those impressions.
Awesome. So I think you kind of took I mean, you actually shared an answer that I was going to ask you, right? Like, what keeps you going after so many years and keeps you excited? I think you encapsulated that very well. Uh, yeah, and you've kind of also said what's the next steps, but I'm curious since you said, there's a trilogy, you've already kind of the way you kind of planned it. Do you have the next album kind of structures of it or what it's going to be already set up?
Already, I'm assembling a couple of ideas.
Okay.
I'm diverse. I differ in between collecting ideas and then really starting writing an album in the studio. So after all the years, I somehow found a very good way that works for me to come up with albums, and that means I'm collecting ideas for a while, months, maybe years. And when I have enough ideas, I'm starting to write the album in the studio. But at that time, I'm not doing anything else. I started to write albums from front to end, and in this period, there is nothing else happening. So I when I'm working on a new Obscura record, I will not write one song or one tad or one melody for any other band. Um, Somehow, every person works a little bit different. For me, this completely being focused on one thing, turned out to be really cool, and I'm very happy about that, because sometimes it takes a while until you find your own comfort zone and your own place that works for you, or a concept to make it happen. For the new record, I know which direction it's going to go. I would love to work with more dynamics. And what I actually tried to do for the Diluvium album a couple of years ago was working with a full orchestra, simply to add more dynamics. And on that album, we worked with something close. It was more like a chamber orchestra. We worked with a couple of single artists. We recorded like a cello, a violin, and doubled that up a couple of times. But it's a different thing working with, the big dishes, and therefore that would be super nice. And there's much more coming. There's much more coming. I love working with acoustic guitars, simply to have a complete contrast to the high distorted sounds of the electric guitars and also the bass. And there's much more to explore, and you can arrange so many cool and wide music and parts and arrangements. It's ridiculous. It's a never-ending story. Therefore, what we just talked about earlier, those guidelines help a lot. With a Valediction, I had the bronze record with a Sonication, the silver one, and the next one will be the golden one, just speaking in colors. And while a Valediction was dealing with a farewell themed world, a Sonication is dealing with reflection. That's the reason it's a little bit more melancholic, introverted, maybe, if you want to call it like that. And the next one will be a more optimistic way to see things and life. So world music approach, maybe that makes sense in some way. It's interesting. So as long as I have ideas and the drive to go on, there will be many more albums. But if I would lose the grip and the joy of what I'm doing with the band, or also the other bands, I would do something else. But again, as I mentioned, I love it, traveling, the lifestyle, making music with different people on stage, in the studio. Perfect. That's a decision you have to make for yourself in life. And I'm very, very happy at the place where I'm right now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stefan. I wish you all the best for 2025 and all the world tour that you've got planned. Who knows? Maybe I'll see you somewhere down the road.
Would be a pleasure. And never say never. And I hope we finally make it over to India. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. Very nice conversation. Thank you.
All right. And that was Steffen Kummerer of Obscura. Lots more coming up on the Trendcrusher podcast. Do follow me on Instagram or whichever social media you use. You can also get in touch with me, trendcrusher@gmail.com. And as always, follow me on whichever podcast platform you're listening to this episode. I'll see you all next week. Cheers.